Good afternoon. My name is Bonnie Fenton from Rupprecht Consult in Cologne, Germany. And on behalf of my colleagues, I'd like to welcome you to this webinar, which we're calling Managing New Mobility, How to Regulate Drones for Last Mile Delivery, taking place today on Thursday, the 10th of June at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, CET. And yes, just for your information, this webinar is being recorded, so others can refer to it later. And I'd just like to, let me see, I'll tell you that we have presenters here from I'm sitting in Bremen. We have Milan, Hamburg, Berlin, and Cologne all represented here. I'll introduce them in a moment, but just before we get there, I would like to tell you what you can expect to see today. So I'll give you a brief context and overview of the GECKO project, which is presenting today's webinar. And also we'll see an overview of the GECKO regulation monitoring tool by my colleague Marisa. We'll have some regulatory challenges and solutions to drone last mile delivery with a perspective from the city of Hamburg. And also the latest on regulations from the European Aviation Safety Agency, and then we will have time for some discussion and questions at the end. And just to get started, the question of GECKO and where we are, this rapid proliferation of new technologies, disruptive innovations, it's taking the world by storm in a lot of areas, and it's threatening well-established players in many sectors, and I would say none more so, or at least, yeah, none more so than the mobility sector, where public and private provision of passenger and freight transport are being threatened by nothing less than a mobility revolution. And regulation so far is struggling to keep up with this rapid development of technology. Regulators and decision makers at different levels can be overwhelmed by this challenge, acknowledging that existing regulatory frameworks are simply not adequate to deal with the new technologies being introduced. And regulation addresses all modes separately and does not go far enough to address the issues beyond just the mobility sector. And if we consider the future of mobility and what that might look like, depending on how we regulate, we can create a green, people-focused city with public transport as the backbone of the system, leading to an extremely efficient mobility in the future. Or a second scenario, we could also go in the direction of a high-tech city where everything is connected to everything else. Perhaps it goes somewhat less in maybe the eco direction, but as long as public and shared systems exist, future mobility can still be efficient. And if you look in this picture, you can in fact see a drone flying off in the distance. So maybe this is a little bit of the scenario that we're looking at today when we're talking about drones. We also have, though, a third possibility. Of course, there are more, but these are the three we're looking at. Where it starts to tip is when we get into an entirely individual-based system that lacks any centralized service. And the technology may be the same, but if it's poorly managed and focuses entirely on the individual, it won't have solved any of the current problems we have, and it probably will add some new ones as well. So from the GECKO perspective, we're talking about making the most of disruption and the question how to do this. And within the GECKO project, our premise is that we need to create the right regulatory framework and cooperation between the public sector and industry and operators. And I might even add, just in this context, in this drones, that we're talking about the public sector at different levels as well. So there are a lot of different relationships that need to be considered when we're looking at disruptive mobility. And with the project, we've started by getting an overview of what's currently out there with regard to disruptive technology, with regard to business models, but also looking at social, business, and technological trends that could affect the market in the future. So these are the things that we started to look at in the project to understand where we currently stand. We've also looked at at policies and governance models. And so the governance challenge is to guide the deployment of technology and new business models in a way that maximizes their benefit for cities. On the other hand, there's a high level of uncertainty as decision makers cannot predict, for example, how new services will develop, how they'll respond to policies, and what their impacts may be. And in such a complex and dynamic environment, it's important to be able to experiment with technology and cooperation to see what measures move the system in a sustainable direction. And we also need to be able to recognize and make sense of emerging patterns. So we've looked in the project at the regulations that exist and trying to understand and assess their characteristics. And the questions then are, how do they accommodate or encourage or perhaps even discourage disruptive mobility services and products? And these are the things that we need to understand about regulations. And the fourth step that we've looked at within the project is and we're just about at this stage, I can say now we're getting quite close to the end of the GECKO project, making recommendations to policymakers at various levels about the types of regulations or indeed packages of regulations that would lead us toward one of the positive future scenarios as opposed to something that's perhaps more chaotic. That's just a really brief overview of what we have done and are working on currently within the GECKO project. And I would like to just tell you what's coming up now. What we have is, first of all, my colleague Marisa Mehta from Fit Consulting in Milan, who is also a partner in the GECKO project, and she'll be presenting GECKO's, the regulation monitoring tool that we've developed within the project, also with a focus on the regulation around drones. We then have Franziska Biermann, who is from the Free and Hanseatic City of Hamburg, who is the head of division cluster policy there, and she will give us the city's perspective on urban air mobility. And our third presenter today is Ken Engelstad from the European Aviation Safety Agency, who is a project manager for drones and U-Space at the European Aviation Safety Agency. And with that, I would like to turn it over to Marisa as our first presenter to talk, as I said, about the tool that's been developed within the GECKO project. Marisa.
Thank you, Bonnie. Hello, everybody. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay, hello everybody, I'm Marisa Mehta from Fit Consulting, and in this presentation I will show you the compliance map, which is a tool we developed during the GECKO project to show the results of the assessment on the regulatory frameworks dealing with the introduction or deployment of new mobility innovations in the mobility field. So here's a list of what we are going to see. First of all, we will explain the objective addressed by the compliance map. Then we will briefly see the methodological approach followed to conduct this assessment. And finally, we will present the tool. So in GECKO, we performed an assessment of the capability of existing regulatory frameworks in enabling the implementation of innovative technologies and business models, while at the same time also safeguarding adequate level of security, safety, data privacy, and social protection. So now let's see how we perform this assessment. First of all, we should clarify what we mean by regulatory frameworks. In GECKO, we could say that we mean the set of binding and non-binding rules, but also policies and investments of cities, regions, and countries composing the regulatory environment that the introduction or deployment of new mobility technology or innovation has to deal with. So the first thing that we did is to identify evaluation categories, which are the main themes under which the regulatory frameworks are assessed. And then within each evaluation category, we identified a set of indicators to be selected according to the mobility innovation analyzed. To quantify these indicators, we both relied on the help of the GECKO stakeholders, who assessed the regulatory approach, starting from reading some relevant excerpts of the regulatory texts, but also by relying on existing international databases such as OECD.stat, World Economic Forum, International Chamber of Commerce, etc. So the next step was to understand within each evaluation category and referring to each innovation, what weight we should attribute to each indicator. So for example, if we are talking about the data aspect regarding drones, is it more important the cybersecurity aspect or the data management one? And is it the same if we are, for example, talking about bike sharing or mobility as a service? So by performing this analysis for all of the evaluation categories, we came up with an overall index that we called regulation compliance, which is representative of the effectiveness of the regulatory frameworks in enabling the adoption of a new mobility innovation. The compliance map shows the results of the analysis of more than 220 regulations, and 14 of those are on drones. These regulations cover countries from macro geographical areas in the world. So now let's see directly at the tool. So this is the GECKO website where the compliance map is already available. And regarding from this list, you can select the mobility innovation to be displayed. So let's click on drones, and you will see the colors automatically update. Regarding the overall index, the regulation compliance, we can see that the darker color, which is the higher score of regulation compliance, is for Australia. Indeed, in Australia, drones can already be used to deliver food, drinks, medical supplies, and other small items to customers living within 10 kilometers radius from the base station. And from this drop-down list, you can also select the evaluation category to be shown. So, for example, if we select the safety aspect, we can see that still Australia is one of the highest regarding safety. And you can also you can also click on the on that hyperlink, and you will be redirected to the main regulatory text or website consulted to conduct the evaluation. So, for example, here the Civil Aviation Safety Authority approved Wing Aviation to operate their drone deliveries in North Canberra and Logan. But before that, Wing was requested to submit a safety case, including an assessment on the reliability of their drones. And then, after assessing this safety case, CSA permitted wing to operate also in a closer proximity to a person than Australian regulations normally permit. Regarding the delivery system, the delivery system of wing is fully automated, but a licensed drone pilot is already at the helm. And then CSA also identified some time windows when drones can be operated. So going back to the compliance map, it also provides an overview of the main barriers that may hinder the adoption or deployment of mobility innovation. So here, if we again select on drones, we can see that the main barriers are legal and social ones. As regards the legal ones, we have a barrier regarding liability. Indeed, drones can be spoofed, and spoofing consists in sending fake GPS signals to the drone so he can be hijacked from his original path. And since it's very difficult to prove the origin of this signal, at the moment the responsibility for a spoofed drone is attributed to the drone operator. Another legal barrier is the uncertainty on privacy requirement. In general, in public space, like parks, street, but also private areas visible from public spaces, there is no legal basis to submit a request of infringement of privacy, as long as the view is limited to eye level. In any case, drones could capture videos or sounds that are not traditionally available to the public. And then another barrier is, of course, safety. Of course about safety concerns, especially where drones are operated over dense urban areas or protected airspaces. And for the delivery service, it's necessary also to consider not only the safety of the drone, but also of the load, the baggage carried from the drone. And at the moment, there is no a clear legal basis that regulates this aspect. So that's all from myself. Thank you, Bonnie.
Thank you, Marisa. It's interesting to hear the examples. I'm curious, we'll maybe come to the discussion afterwards, but the idea of what's different in Australia, because they seem to be quite farther advanced than what we see generally in Europe. But it was interesting. Maybe we'll come back to one concrete example, though. In Europe, we have the Free and Hanseatic City of Hamburg, represented by Franziska Biermann, who is going to talk about, I guess, some of the challenges and the solutions, and also a project that Hamburg is involved with. So, Franziska, can I turn it over to you?
Yes, thank you, Bonnie. Good afternoon. I would like to present our city's point of view for the city of Hamburg, because we are facing several challenges, and we think that we have kind of a blueprint or something like that. So we are one of the cities to represent the challenges nearly every city in Europe will face when implementing the use-based regulation. What is the next presentation from Ken? So
Franziska, we can't hear you all of a sudden. It was fine, and then I'm not sure if you hit your mute button.
Excuse me.
You're back.
Thank you. Yes, I can just come back with a short history of the drone economy, or the drone breakdown here in Hamburg. We started in 2016 when we found out that we have some companies here in Hamburg dealing with the topics of drones, be it manufacturers or companies applying drones, the operators. And so we created a network called Windrove to bring together all the different stakeholders. And then we thought that we should actively push that topic in a way and think about what drones can be used for in a way. And we thought about the economic perspectives of drone operations, the industrial perspective, and of course, in the end, the mobility perspective. And yes, what is important for a city to know is how will the public, how will our citizens deal with that topic? Are they really want drone traffic because it's another dimension? It's something quite new. Will they really be, let's say, ready for that new kind of mobility? And the EASA conducted this. Now I see my mistake while I pushed the wrong button. So the EASA conducted a study on the question of where citizens of different European cities find useful use cases for drones. And this is this is what they found out. I think they asked citizens in 6 European cities. Hamburg was one of them. And what you can see from this survey is that citizens really see useful use cases for drones when it comes to medical use cases, like transport of medical supplies, even injured persons, which would be run by air taxis. Transport of emergency personnel, and then ranked 4th, disaster management. And today we are here thinking about last mile delivery, and this is ranked slightly lower than medical use cases. This long distance forwarding of heavy cargo is ranked in 5th position, and drone delivery of goods from online shopping in urban area, which would be the last mile logistics, or drone delivery of meals in urban area, is ranked much lower than the medical use cases. So this gives us as a city overview of the needs and what our citizens really want or find useful when implementing drone traffic in cities. Now I come back to the Hamburg setting, because we face several challenges in Hamburg, and one of them is the quite complex airspace. We have 2 airports in Hamburg. One is a local airport. One is at the Airbus site at the south of the city. Our local airport has crossing runways, and this means that almost the entire city is a control zone. And of course, when flying around Hamburg, the route will almost immediately cross the final approach segments of one of the airports. And yes, I think this is really challenging. Then we have some hospitals with a lot of helicopter traffic. So helicopter traffic is meant in a medical or maybe police or fire department way. So to implement drone traffic means a lot of question of separation or integration, or how to communicate with each other. And this is something that nearly every big city in Europe will face when implementing the use bases. Of course, we also have some nature conservation areas where you are not allowed to fly, or maybe in a certain heat, or maybe you have to think about some noise levels for drones. So this is another topic for all the cities in Europe, I guess. Now, the challenge when it comes to implement UAM, and I showed that that especially medical transport is supported by the citizens, is that if you think of last mile delivery, it's a huge amount of parcels that is delivered every day in a city. And for Hamburg, at the end of 2019. We had 100 million deliveries per year, like parcels, like clothes, books, whatever you can imagine. 46% of them for private households, and this means this is 125,000 deliveries per day, and this was before the Corona crisis, where online shopping got another push. So I don't think that people really imagine to have 125,000 drone flights per day in Hamburg. So what our approach is to start in a way with medical use cases, with emergency use cases, and to see how the reaction of the public will be, to find out if maybe last mile delivery will be in 10 years something very, very normal. We don't know. We don't have a view in the future. But I think we have to keep in mind that if we start with last mile delivery, it's a huge amount of parcels and deliveries that have to be flown by a drone. And another challenge is, of course, where drones should take off and land. I think the flights in 100 meters or higher is not the problem, but more you need vertiports for bigger drones transporting heavy goods, but even for smaller drones. So you might put the parcel at the balcony or in the garden, but what about weather conditions? What about loss if you keep a parcel there? So these are all questions one has to keep in mind when thinking about last mile delivery by a drone. And last thing on this slide, I already mentioned it, is of course the public acceptance, and this is something that is really important here in Hamburg, and we have some projects either already conducted or proposed that deal with that topic. That is the first project is Medifly Hamburg. It's transporting medical goods and tissue samples between hospitals. So if you have a surgery, especially, for example, if you have if there's something with cancer or something, if you do a surgery and you want to analyze the tissue, you have to bring it to a pathology, and most hospitals nowadays don't have their own pathology, but they bring it with coaches or taxis to another pathology to analyze if all the tissue is extracted. So this could be really be done by drones, and it could save time for the patient lying in the surgery. And so this is one of the projects we guess we have a high public acceptance for, because anyone could be the one lying there and waiting for for the analysis. And within that project, which started in the second phase last September, we as a city are planning to do some road shows to give some information about the project, about the flights, about the routes. And within that project, we will also have a study on the public acceptance, especially on the question of capacity and how public acceptance is maybe changing when we have a 6-month test phase within that project. And so what is the attitude towards drone traffic at the beginning of the project, and what is the attitude towards drone traffic at the end of the project? These could be questions that should be answered within that project. Then another project we have, which is just proposed, but we hope that it starts in a short time, is a use-based living lab within our Hamburg port area, to implement the first test phase of the different stakeholders that the use-based regulation is planning to implement, like a common information service provider and the use-based service provider, and how they interact with each other. And within that project, we also plan information events during a flight week. Another project that is also dealing with the use-based regulation is a proposed project called USTRUT, because the forthcoming use-based regulation has an article 18F, where it says that member states should collaborate with local authorities and entities. They should have a mechanism to get in touch with the local level. And we are going one step behind and thinking about what we at the local level could do to include all different stakeholders, like the public and the different entities here in Hamburg. And we are also, as a City of Hamburg, as member of the European UIC2 network. We are representing that network in the EASA work package for that Article 18F regulation for the guidance material. And for us as a city, it is quite important to have this regulation, to have a legal framework, because without, we don't see these economic and mobility perspectives. There would be chaos. So we need that framework. Above cities, this is a space you see. Maybe if you are at home, you want to close your door, you don't want to hear the cars, and the question is, do you really want to see a drone flying there? And for us, it is over the clouds. Freedom must be borderless, but not above the cities. We must get in contact with our citizens and find a balance. So between the private interests of the drone operators and the public that wants their recreation spaces or something like that. And we think that this acceptance is achieved at the local level, and in the end, this balance must be legally binding. And we think that starting with some medical projects is the first step to do that, because we think that we have a high public acceptance for that. And since we think that our local level is quite important, our UIC2 cities initiative, the use-based, the UAM initiative on cities and communities, launched a manifesto last December at the Amsterdam Drone Week, because we think that UAM offers new opportunities, but it's also new tasks and responsibilities for cities. And we think that they should have a deciding role, because we are, as I mentioned before, we are the local level where the acceptance is created, and we have to balance the interests. We are the one to represent our local citizens. And therefore, we propose that the cities have a deciding role for allowing the operation of use-based services and in establishing to what extent UAM services are to be conducted. As I said, it's a question of capacity in a way. Where those use-based and UAM flights are allowed, where takeoff and landing sites are built, because public space is a scarce resource within cities. And of course, one important topic is also the prosecution of infringement. So how do we deal with non-cooperative drones? And I think that with that manifesto, or the one outcome of the manifesto is that Article 18F within the use-based regulation that I mentioned, where it says that that member states or the competent authorities shall develop a mechanism to get in touch with the local level. And I think this is, this is a good outcome of that, and we think that the this multi-level governance of all the different levels, be it at the national level, be it at the European Union level or at the local level, is a good way to deal with this. And up to now, 28 cities and regions have signed this manifesto, and there are still cities to come, and even on an international level. So up to now, these 28 cities and regions are from across Europe, but there will be even international cities want to sign that manifesto. So this was it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Franziska. Fascinating examples, super interesting. I think just from the perspective of the GECKO project to see what you've done here, I would call this sort of a textbook example of how to manage at different levels. So you're dealing with other levels of governance. You're also dealing with your citizens. You're dealing with the private sector, taking a proactive approach as a city to say, what do we want the space around our city to look like, as opposed to just waiting to see what happens. Really nicely presented, totally interesting project. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. We'll move on now to a different perspective. So we've been at the local level, and now we're jumping to the European level at the, wait, and I'm going to say it wrong again, the European Aviation Safety Agency. I keep getting it backwards, but the European Aviation Safety Agency, and Ken Engelstad is presenting from there, and will tell us particularly about what the regulation, sort of where things stand right now, what's been developing. Of course, this is something extremely current right now. The regulations around drones don't exist for very long, so anything that we're seeing, I would say, is brand new. Ken, I'll maybe say to the audience, we've been having camera issues, so you're not going to see Ken, but you will hear him, and you should be able to see his screen already. And I'll turn it over to you now. Ken?
Thank you very much, Bonnie, for this. And I would like, first of all, to thank you and Christine for organizing this webinar. I am actually replacing my colleague Maria, who could not make it today, but I'm really happy to be here. If you see on the first slide, actually, I have put a subtitle there. It is only to reflect the fact that there are a lot of things that could be said on the regulation. You will see that I will just briefly present the three regulations, and I will mainly focus on the one that is of interest for us, meaning the use space regulation. But I just wanted to give you, I would say, some elements of discussions around the regulatory framework that we have in place now in the drone, in the European drone framework.
Can I just interrupt you really briefly, Ken?
Yes,
I'm sorry to
yes.
before you get started. We were discussing before this that you have quite a few acronyms within your presentation. I'll just say to the audience, we're going to drop a list of them into the chat in case you need them for reference. We'll get something about use space in particular, but the others, just so you know that they're there for reference, it may be helpful. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Bonnie, for this clarification. Actually, we are used to handle so many acronyms here that we sometimes forget to maybe sometimes explain them or spelling them out during the presentation. So I can see in the chat that you have already started to spell out some acronyms. I mean, if there are any others, I'm happy, of course, to clarify those. So you see here just basically for the moment what we have is a framework of three regulations. We have the two first ones which are from 2019, which are actually known under the 947 and 945 regulation, and these are the ones that are actually related to the operations, how to operate an unmanned aircraft, and more on the systems of and the design of the UAS. And then very recently in April, the Commission adopted, and it was published in the EU official journal. We have then Regulation 664 of 2021. On the use space, you will see that in one of my slides later on that it is not only one regulation, but it is a, I would say, package of 3 regulations. But I've just mentioned here the first one, the 664, because this is the one that is basically known by the drone community. Very quickly on the regulatory approach, I will not go into the details on this. The point I want really to highlight here is the risk-based. It is not operational based, it's risk-based, and all the regulatory framework is based on this risk-based approach. And of course, as we do also for other regulation in other aviation domains, we are also performance-based regulation oriented, and then what we also provide through the package of acceptable means of compliance, we try to provide as much as possible flexibility for the affected stakeholders to be able to comply with the regulations. You see just there on the left, the regulations are of course directly applicable in all the member states, so there's no need of a national implementation for this. And of course, all the certificates are actually recognized mutually in all the member states. So if you have a certificate to operate a drone in one member state, it should be recognized in another member state. This slide, you might have already seen it because this is the, I would say, standard one that we use in most of our presentation. I will not go in details of it because I'm not the project manager for the 947 regulation, but it is basically just to highlight that there are 3 categories of drone that are regulated, and you might have already heard of those 3 categories: the open, the specific, and the certified. And then you see, according to the colors, the level of, I would say, difficulty to have an approval or an authorization to operate these kinds of drones. So if you're in the open, you don't basically need to have anything, but there are some conditions of weight. You need to be in vision line of sight, and these are basically small drones that are used for recreational purpose. So when you are in the specific category, it means that you are not in the, I would say, in the limits of the open category, and therefore the risk is increased for your operation. And then you would need to make what we call a SORA, which is a term that is, I think, now well known from by everyone, certainly in the drone community. And with this, once the operator has done a specific operational risk assessment, it needs to have an authorization by the competent authority in order to start the operations in the specific category. Of course, we are talking about beyond vision line of sight operations mainly. And for the last mile delivery, this is basically the category that is subject to, I would say, the scope of the subject today. And then we do not have any regulation for this. We are currently preparing a first proposal for regulation, which is an NPA on the certified category. And basically, if you are in the certified category, that means that you are actually operating similarly to a manned aircraft. So you need a certification of airworthiness, you need a pilot license, and of course you need to have an approval as an operator. And basically for this certified category, it's quite complicated because it has a lot of interaction with air traffic management, with air crew, air operations rules. So we are now currently preparing a set of rules in order to cover this type of category. So I would say that for us today, for the last mile delivery, this is what, I mean, the category which is mostly subject to is the one in the specific category, meaning you don't need an approval but an authorization by the competent authority once you have done a risk assessment. I will come to this. I just have one slide for all the 3 categories of drone. So for the open category, there are a lot of information here, but I will not go through it deeply. It's basically just to, as I mentioned, when you are in the open category, you are always seeing your drone. Because also it cannot fly over 120 meters, and you have different subcategories in the open category, which have laid down here on the slide, the A1, the A2, and the A3. Basically, the process is what you see in yellow. So you buy your drone, you need to register your drone, you need to complete a kind of training that you do. It's a self-training actually that you do once you have opened your box and set your machine, and then you just go and fly. Of course, there are some requirements because as a drone pilot, you are responsible for the safety of your operation. When you are in the specific category, then as I mentioned, you have what we call the SORA. This is the specific operational risk assessment. And once the operator has completed its risk assessment, then it can ask for an authorization, and this operational authorization will be stamped by the competent authority. There are actually 3 other ways of starting your operations in the specific category. You can apply for the authorizations once you have also completed a predefined risk assessment, which we call a PDRA. Myself, I'm not fully aware of all the requirements that are there, but there is a certain procedure to follow in order to complete this PDRA to apply for the authorization. Another mean how you can start your operation is to follow the standard scenario that we have published. We have published for the moment 2 standard scenarios. There are, I think, a couple more that will be coming in the next months. Basically, it will allow you to start and to declare to the competent authority. You don't need an authorization, you just start your operation, but you need to be able to I would say, provide the evidence to the competent authority that you have actually, or you are meeting the standard scenario for your specific operation. And then there is a 4th way of starting your operation in the specific category, and this is by the means of having a light UAS certificate. Meaning that it is not a certification. It's basically, I would say, and I mean the word explains it all. It's really a light certificate which gives you certain privileges. Of course, there are some requirements in the regulation that you need to follow in order to apply and to obtain this certificate. But once you have done this, you do not need to have any authorization. You just start your operations. So these are basically the 4 ways, I would say, to for an operator to start its operation in the specific category. And of course, all this risk assessment framework is done because, of course, we want to ensure that, in particular in urban environments, the operator can conduct its operation in a very safe manner, because you are flying over people, over building, and there is then a need to comply with certain requirements before having the authorization to start operations. And then the 3rd category is the certified one. I just have one slide here. Basically, if you're not in the open and not in the specific category, then you are in the certified one, and this is basically more complex operations. As I said, you need an airworthiness certificate. You need an operator certificate, and then you need to have a pilot license, such as any other pilot license. Of course, it will be adapted to the remote pilot environment. As I said, we are currently working on the certified category. We are preparing some rules. We have developed also a concept paper, and of course, because we are talking about much more complex machines and operations, we need to ensure that these type of drones can safely operate within the airspace where also traditional manned aircraft will be flying quite densely. I just want to remind you of, well, I would say that's quite basic things, the responsibility aspect, both of the US operator and of the remote pilot. So as I said, for the open, for the specific, and for the certified, you are always responsible for the operation or for the safety of the operation. And the same if you are doing it in a remote way, that you ensure that you are not endangering people when flying your drone. So this is really the basic principle when conducting operations in one of the three categories in the regulation 947. So that was basically it for the drone regulation, which is applicable, which was applicable since 31st of December last year. So very, I would say, quite recently. I mentioned the use space, and I would like here to emphasize on the fact that the use space regulation will only be applicable as from 26th of January 2023, so in a bit more than 2 years and a half now. And there has been quite a lot of question marks at the very beginning on the term use space. Actually, I would say that it is a term that is that basically it's coming from the Commission and from the former commissioner. Everybody knows in worldwide the term UTM, and actually use space is the European UTM, so unmanned traffic management. So how to manage the traffic for drones. There is no, I would say, known explanation for the U. Sometimes it's also a bit misleading, I think, because we are talking about space. So is U space a volume of airspace? What does the U stand for? There is no, I would say, firm response to that. That's why I've mentioned here on the slide, you know, it could be unmanned, it could be urban, it could be unlimited, it could be undefined. What about the space? Are we talking about the whole airspace, above the airspace, in the stratosphere? Is it even open space? I don't know. So there is no, I would say, explanation for this. It's just a term that it needs to be taken as it is, but it is basically the brand for the UTM in the European Union. Just here, I just wanted to show. This is an old slide actually that I've taken from a presentation in 2019, I think, when we started the drafting of the regulation. It's basically just to avoid what we have there on the road. So for now, I know that there are not many, or there are not thousands of drones flying, but in the future, you might see what you see there on the picture, and then managing the traffic for drones will be very complicated. And this is why we really need to have some rules on the management of air traffic for drones. And this is what the regulation, or the use space regulation, is trying to cover. Not only safety, but also, and this is also, I would say this is a bit more of an EU policy, more related to the task of the European Commission, but this is really to enable also a competitive market for the drones in Europe. You see there, I mean, different kinds of drone operations from line inspections to medical to delivery of goods to photography for crop spray or for aerial work. So all these different types of operations, of drone operations, need to be able to, I would say, operate in a competitive market in order to allow the market to grow, such as it has been done in the telecom area. So the use space, basically, it's an enabler, I would say, of for drone operations in the EU. I have put here, and I would say, not being proud of myself, but I would say that this is something that that comes from me. I've not heard anyone talking about this. When talking about use space, people sometimes say it's not a volume of airspace, and sometimes people say it's not about services. I think that it is a combination of all those elements. So for me, use space is a set of service. Of course, you have use space services. You will have use space service providers providing such services in the area which has been designated by the member states to be a use space airspace. Of course, because you have a certain set of service in a particular volume of airspace, therefore use space is a volume of airspace, whether we like it or not. And then the third element is really, I would say, the core of the success of the use space, and this is how the information is managed between all the stakeholders about all the participants of the use space. So it's really the gathering of the information and the dissemination of the information, which needs to be accurate, which needs to comply with certain data quality requirements, and which needs to be also of high integrity in order for the actors of the use space to exchange real-time and operational data and information among themselves. Just here, very quickly, some considerations. You see, I've already talked about the market there on the last line. It's basically really just to a bit frame the I would say the activity on use space, recognizing that of course it goes beyond the traditional aviation scope. That we are now talking about technologies that are developing. When we are talking about technologies, we are of course maybe not now, but in a few years' time, talking about automation. Franziska has already mentioned the fact that technologies also are developing fast, and that the regulation would need to, I would say, more or less run in parallel if possible. Franziska has also talked about societal concern with the publication of the study that we released very recently, and all this consideration has actually pushed the European Commission and EASA to develop this use space regulation, which already started in 2018. A bit more now on the building blocks. So very quickly here, I've mentioned already that use space is a use space airspace that will be designated by the member states. When we are talking about use space, we are of course referring to use space services. I've talked about the information which will be provided by a common information service. I've mentioned also very quickly use space service providers, which will be the providers of the use space services. There is in the regulation some requirements on the competent authority, and this Article 18F that was mentioned by Franziska is one of them. And then of course those who will be the customer of the use space service providers, the US operators, of course, also have the specific requirements in the regulation. I've mentioned to you at the beginning that the use space is not only the number one on your left that you see, the 664 that I mentioned at the beginning of my presentation. There are also two other regulations. They are very small because basically they are just amending existing regulation in order to cover some requirements for ANSPs and some requirements on the conspicuity means when manned aviation is operating in a use-based airspace and needs to be visible to the use-based service provider. But mainly, as I said, it is really the use-based, the number one there, use-based regulation that is mainly referred to when talking about the use-based regulatory framework. Very quickly, I just want to show you here the regulated entities. I've already shown you who are regulated by the use base. There are some operations that are excluded. Some of the open category, for example, military and special operations are excluded as well from the regulation. On the designation of the use-based airspace, as I said, the member states will designate the use-based airspace. This is the sovereign power. Pay attention that the use-based airspace can be in controlled or uncontrolled airspace. So it is not replacing any current airspace classification that we have now for manned aircraft, but it's, I would say, coming over the existing airspace classification that we have. And this is why when they designate the use-based airspace, it can be either in class C or in class G airspace. I've mentioned, no, I've not mentioned it, but there is an airspace risk assessment to be done by the member states before they designate or when they designate the use-based airspace. And for example, they could actually require to have additional use-based services in that area if they deem so necessary. 6 use-based services, 4 are mandatory in the regulation, 2 are optional. It is really, some people would say it is a minimum, some people would say it's not enough. We in EASA, we say that these are the necessary ones to kick off the use space, because what we have for the moment in the regulation is quite high level. It's really to start and to enable the operators to operate safely, conduct safely their operations. There will be more services that will be developed and put in the regulation as the technology progresses and the maturity of the services are demonstrated. I've talked about the common information service, which will be provided by the single SIS provider, and then both the single SIS provider and the use-based service provider will need to be certified if they want to provide services in the use-based airspace. Manned aviation, I have already explained a little bit, the controlled and the uncontrolled airspace. And then I think, yes, there are some annexes there on the technical specifications, but not really of relevance for today's discussion. And then I want to just explain a little bit the use-based services here, or just to show you more concretely. As I said, there are 4 mandatory services to be provided in the use-based airspace. This is the network ID, the geo-awareness, traffic information, and US flight authorization. These services need to be provided by the use-based service providers to the US operators. And then as I would say supporting services, you see there the 2 optional ones, which I mentioned just before, the conformance monitoring service and the weather information service. Basically, those 2 are not mandatory for the US operators to get when they are operating in the use-based airspace and they are contracting with the use-based service provider. My last slide here is basically what is going on now. Maybe, as you know, and Franziska has already mentioned or referred to this work package 9 of the group developing the AMC and gases material for Article 18F, which is the coordination with local authorities. And we at EASA, we have set up a steering group for this, and we have split the work into several work packages and into subgroups, and for which the main objectives you see is really to, of course, I mean, provide some means of compliance, because as I said, the regulation is quite high level. So provide some means of compliance for those who need to comply with the regulation, that they can comply with that in a very flexible and proportionate manner. And specifically for the services, really to make use of what is currently being done in the standardization bodies, not only European ones, but also others. And these AMCs, what we are going to provide will be, of course, will need to be adapted to evolving technologies. And this is why, as I mentioned, we do not have a long range of use-based services, because we do not have yet the maturity enough on the technologies that can ensure the safety of the operation of drones. This is going very fast, such as a regulation, by the way, and because we have started the work at the beginning of this year, and we plan to come up with a package of means of compliance in order to implement the regulation by December this year. Of course, it will be done, it should be published before the applicability date of the regulation, which is 26 January 2023. So we plan to have a publication of the AMC and gases material, I would say not later than mid-2022. Just for your information, when the AMC and gases material is EASA responsibility, so it is not going through the Commission. And it is not, because it is not part of a regulation, it is not, it will not be published in the EU official journal, but it is part of I would say, the European regulatory framework. So Bonnie, I think I will stop here. I think I went quite fast on certain slides, but I'm of course happy to answer any questions that the audience would have. So I turn back to you, Bonnie. Thank you.
Okay, well, I'll start off also with a big thank you to you, Ken, for providing all of that. There's a lot going on. It's interesting to see, you said you covered it quickly, but there's a lot to cover. And this, I think, is just a nice sort of case study for us. I guess I can turn my camera back on. I'll reappear for you. Sorry about that. It's an interesting case study for us to see sort of from the context of GECKO, that we're looking at the regulation of new mobility, and this is exactly what's happening. You can see that the technology is advancing, and you need to somehow stay maybe a step ahead of it, or at least with it, with the regulations, in order that you can encourage the kind of development that you want to encourage, but at the same time break or stop the things that may not be what you want to see. At this point, I don't see any questions in the question box, but I'm happy to take them. If anybody would like to ask questions, we can take them that way. Maybe I'll ask our speakers to reappear, if that's okay. At least Marisa and Franziska, you can come back and join me on the stage. Ken, we're leaving you as the invisible man in this group. I'm sorry about that.
Yes,
although we
sorry.
know it's your technology issues, we'd like to say. It's not that we didn't want to invite you onto the stage with us. If there are no questions right now, I would like to ask maybe one or two quick ones myself, just based on what I've heard, because it's, as I said, super interesting. Coming back to you, Franziska, first, from what you've just heard Ken saying, what do you think, or how does the regulatory work being done at the European level, so the European Aviation Safety Agency, and you talked about the challenges that you're facing at the City of Hamburg, and I'm wondering what the things that Ken is talking about, are they addressing the challenges that you face as a city, or are these challenges that you need to address at the local level. How does this fit together for you?
I think there's a good fit. So one of the things I mentioned and Ken mentioned as well is this Article 18F, where it says that the competent authorities shall get in touch with the local level, and then of course the local authorities are responsible for the process within their cities to get a picture and to say if there are some restrictions you need. So I think this is a really good thing, and of course there are other topics that I mentioned, like our very challenging airspace in Hamburg, and I think also this topic is covered. It's, the whole use space regulation is about the question of how to deal with that. So is there rather integration or separation, and how to deal with other flying objects like helicopters or something. So this is addressed, or it's maybe not fully covered, but it's addressed. So yes, I think there's a good link to our topics.
Thank you. Ken, if we turn that around, how do you see the collaboration between the local and the EU level in the development of regulations around drones? Obviously, we're talking particularly over cities. I'm not sure if you've been involved in other regulatory processes, but I'm wondering, is this different with drones? This collaboration between the local and the international? How do you see this, and how does it help you in the development of the regulations?
Yes, it's a good question, Bonnie. First of all, what I would like to say is that we, as a European regulator, we propose a regulatory framework that then is adopted by the European Commission. Therefore, we are not, I would say, directly or immediately I would say, involved in the discussion with the cities, because this needs usually to be done between the cities and the national authorities. What we do, what we can do is, of course, provide this regulatory framework. What we also do in the context of the use space is that we are, I would say, quite deeply involved with some of the cities, for which we provide or we exchange, we provide information, we clarify a few points on the regulatory framework. We try to exchange on different issue of operational issues. We have also sometimes some, I would say, continuous exchange of developments between what is being done in the different cities and what we are actually trying to produce in the framework of the AMC and gas and material work. So we are collaborating with the cities, but I would say in a more high level sense, which is really trying to provide to the cities a better understanding of the regulation. The involvement, or I would say at a lower level, the cities are actually, and because this is not our role either, nor from EASA or from the Commission, we are leaving the cities and the national authorities to actually exchange on this matter and see how best they can implement this Article 18F. But of course, as I said, we are always there in order to support this relationship between the authorities and the cities the best way we can in the interpretation of the European rules.
Yeah, I think all of this has just sort of made it clear what the complexity of all this is. All of the actors involved in the private sector, the public sector, at local, all the way up to the European level. I wanted to just ask Marisa if you had any thoughts on this. You identified, so within the tool that mainly you developed for the GECKO project, there were at least 3 barriers that were identified with regard to safety, I think, privacy concerns, and also liability. what did you hear? Because I'm pretty sure anyway that the 2019 regulation that Ken talked about, regulations that Ken talked about, are already incorporated in our tool. I'm guessing the 2021s are not yet because they just came out last month. I'm just wondering, how do you see this, or are you able to talk to the barriers being addressed, or with these new regulations, or do you want to comment on this?
Yes, first of all, I would like to emphasize the different approach followed in, for example, in Australia, where indeed the national, the civil authority for safety aviation directly give the approval to Wing to operate in for example, in Logan. So here is direct link to the approval to operation. As regards the barriers, I think that one of the most important one probably is the one of safety concerns. Of course, people are afraid of having a drone falling on their heads, but on the other hand, the image of the drones radically improve when they are used to deliver medical supplies or first aids. So I think that this could be a driver using drones also for to deliver medical supplies and have a good image of the use of these tools.
Yeah, most certainly. And from what you say, I come back to Franziska again. It sounds to me like you're doing a really good job in Hamburg of bringing this together, being really proactive about it, addressing, say, the drivers, as Marisa says, the ways that it's most valuable and effective to use drones, and maybe being more careful about other uses for them. At the same time, discussing, collaborating with stakeholders and with citizens. It sounds like you're doing a really cool job. I don't mean to do promotions for Hamburg, but I'm just really impressed with what you're talking about. With that, I think there are no other questions. I'm going to maybe call it a wrap. We're just about at the end of our time. So I would just like to say a huge thank you to Franziska from the City of Hamburg, to Ken from the EASA, because I'll get the acronym wrong again, and my colleague Marisa from Fit Consulting in Italy for taking us through all this today. I think there's been a lot of really interesting and informative stuff. One more message I would like to give: the GECKO project is coming to an end. We're having our final conference online on the 25th and 26th of August, and more information will be coming up about that, but I hope you'll keep an eye open for it. And we'll hear more about the tool, maybe from Marisa, more examples, and also some of the other products and particularly recommendations coming out of the GECKO project. So with that, again, a big thank you to our panelists today, and thank you for the audience. And this it has been recorded, as we've said, and will be available on the GECKO website for others to see in the future. So again, thank you very much, everybody, and good afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bonnie. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.